Hello, everyone. Thank you for stopping by my channel. So today I have another interview, and this is Brewster. He is the president of Evermind Ministries, and he is a biblical counselor and speaker. So I'm really excited because we're going to be talking about exceptional education model that he has come up with when he homeschools his kids. And I'm sure that you said that you were homeschooled as well, correct?
I was homeschooled with the exceptions of kindergarten and seventh grade, but other than that, all the way up.
Okay, cool. So I'm assuming this is something that was inspired from your childhood and your experience as well.
Well, yes, in part. My mom was a really fantastic educator, and she didn't just teach us what we needed to learn through our homeschooling process. She taught us the value of education. She taught us how to educate. So, the importance of education from a biblical perspective and an academic perspective, the process of how to do it was always part of our education. So much so that we were often given the opportunities in church settings and things like that to be kind of mentoring and helping and teaching in Sunday schools and things like that. I had the opportunity to start teaching as part of a martial arts course when I was 15, and just multiple opportunities my mom was giving me as she was helping my sister and I to learn how what education is and how it works well. So early on, I was studying education. I was studying homeschooling because like we came on very early on. It started in kind of the late 70s ish, but started to become a little bit more of a known thing in the 80s, less mainstream, especially where we were living at the time. And so I was studying what homeschooling was, why people do it, and that really created a love in me for education, for homeschooling, and something that continued on so that when I did my work in undergrad and I did my work in grad work, I was still studying it, I was still researching it, and developing over the process of decades this concept of expectational education, which I finally had the opportunity in shortly after, maybe around 2010, to actually start putting into practice after all those years of theorizing and researching and whatnot, to actually start putting into practice with my own children.
So, okay, so I'm just going to jump right in. What exactly is this expectational education model that you've come up with?
So it's really based off of a number of factors and just so for your listeners, so they know, this is not designed to be a cohesive curriculum. It's not designed to be an educational philosophy that replaces what you're doing. This can really be used in any situation. I tell people when I'm speaking with other educators from Christian schools and public schools, these ideas can actually be used in those settings to help our students really achieve what they are capable of. But this grew out of the observation that the concept of genius is expected. If you study the geniuses of the past, the people who accomplished things that the average human never did, what we find is that very few of them were actually metrically gifted. Like, we could actually measure the fact that these people had some inherent skill that everyone else doesn't have. The vast majority of them actually just had somebody in their life that was expecting greatness from them. That could have been themselves, or it could have been an authority figure or a peer. But all of them had that. They had somebody in their life pushing them to do more than was expected from them by everybody else. In addition to that, we see that throughout human history, up until the 1920s, children, whatever we refer to as children, right? Because that's a very interesting concept. Adolescence didn't exist before the early 1900s. Children were people who were generally 12 years old and younger. But even children were treated differently than they are nowadays. When they started to become 13, 14, we see over the course of history that these young people, these what we would refer to as adolescents, were accomplishing amazing things. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein at the age of 18. Louis Braille, he created the Braille language when he was 15. Most of your viewers will potentially be familiar with the fact that Laura Ingalls Wilder was an official school teacher around the ages of 14 and 15. And we see that history is replete with teenage monarchs ruling nations, children starting families, building businesses, having their farms. This was human existence for thousands of years. comes screeching to a halt in the 1920s, everything changes, and we're viewing our children's education very differently. And that change really, I think, was the opposite of expectational education. Instead of saying what are children actually capable of doing as God has created them, we started saying they're not capable. They're not capable, right? And it started for a good reason. 1920s just said, we need to get children out of the factories. I'm glad. Sure, that was good. Those were unsafe environments. But that philosophy pervaded the entire culture, and we started saying children can't do this, and they can't do this, and they can't do this, and they can't do this. And people are more than happy to fall to the lowest level of expectations in their lives. So expectational education is just about identifying what a child truly is capable of and providing them the expectations that will motivate them to accomplish that.
Okay. So is this mostly for the adolescence age, or does this apply to the younger kids?
It applies to every age.
Every age. Okay.
Yep.
So can you give us an example of how this would work?
Yeah, well, I'll use my own kids. Okay. Now, I was just going to say what I'm about to tell you for some people is very, they say, oh, well, of course. Other people would be like, whoa, those kids are different. They're special. Yeah, I love my kids. They are special to me, right? But my children, I do not think it would be appropriate to say that my kids are equipped with things that most other people's children don't have access to, right? Now, special needs kids, by the way, this still applies to special needs kids. This is not creating a standard by which we're trying to have every child meet up to. This is about finding the individualized, what I call moments, those appropriately high expectations. Forget what the A stand for. The appropriately high expectations for each individual child within the broader framework of what they're universally capable of, children. So all that to say that my kids do not fall under that official genius category where they're naturally gifted in ways that the rest of the populace is not. Okay. With that said, when I had been a school teacher in a Christian school for a while, I've been homeschooled, been researching it for a long time. When my son got to about 4 or 5 years old, I think it was 4, I decided that it was time to start putting into practice some of these ideas that I had come to. And so I pulled out a number of math books. At the Christian school I was teaching at that time used Saxon math. And I pulled out those math books and I just sat down with them. And I just kind of as a game, just reading, just playing, not, like formal education, but I sat down with him at the dining room table. We started going through, just seeing what concepts he was good with. I started at the beginning of the book. I moved to the middle. We talk about some stuff. I moved to the end of the book. I set aside the first grade book, brought the second grade book, third grade book. It wasn't until I got to the fourth grade book that I found that as we talked through the ideas, that there was a level that he was hitting. He was hitting a wall because there were concepts that were unfamiliar to him or a little bit beyond where he was functioning. That was what I expected to see. In most curriculum, what you find is that each year they're introduced to very little new information. There's this about information within a curriculum. The next year is about this much. There's this tiny little bit of new information, and there's all of this review, previous information from the year before. There's always this massive overlap in information from year to year. I taught English from first grade all the way through 12th grade, but in the Christian school system, I taught it in the junior high and the high school. And it was amazing to me that the amount of English concepts that you learn between junior high and 12th grade, or the 11th grade at least, are about 5 to 10 new concepts. You're rehearsing the same information every year. The complexity of the sentences is growing, right? Your new vocab words, but the actual grammatical concepts, there aren't that many of them. So with that said, with that reality, also with some research that was done in the early in the 70s and 80s, it showed that if you took 2 groups of kids, one of them who went to school in first grade, the other group stayed out. By the time both of those kids got to 6th grade, okay, these children had never had formal education, but these had. When these 12-year-olds were put into 6th grade, not only did they surpass their peers in performance, but they also were not burnt out. They enjoyed school. They liked what they were doing. And one of the reasons they could do that is the fact that there is so much repeated information in first through 12th grade. You can learn it all in 1 year. So back to my son, I took this information and I started bringing in other stuff just to see how he was doing. And I found that at 4 or 5 years old, he could easily handle third and fourth grade materials. Fast forward a little bit. It's now time for my daughter, who's 2.5 years younger than my son, to start a little bit more of a formal education. I believe that, as a homeschooler, everything is education, right? But you understand what I'm saying about formal education. And I said, I think I'm probably a good example of a lazy homeschooling parent. I had 2 children, by God's grace. We wanted more, but 2 is all we could have. And I said, it wouldn't be nice just to teach 1 English class and 1 history and 1 science and 1 math instead of teaching 2. And so, well, I'm gonna try this. My son at this point, he was basically about 2 years ahead of where he would have been had he been placed into the school system. So I went ahead and I said, okay, well, I'm gonna put Ivy, my daughter, in with my son, and we'll see how she does. I'm just gonna teach her the same information, and if she ends up struggling, it's not working for her, I'll find out what works for her, and we'll go with that. But what I found is that because of a number of concepts, I believe, she actually rose to the occasion, and she was succeeding very well. She was surpassing my son in some categories. In other categories, she was behind him. She's over the years, she has technically been a few steps behind him grade-wise, if you want to look at it that way. But she has good usage and understanding of this material. So my son, he took his first dual credit college course at the age of 13. And I told him, I said, man, I'm so proud of you. What you have accomplished is really great. He got a 4.0 in that course. I said, but just realize that almost everybody is not going to be as impressed by what you did. And when I looked to his sister, and I said, because Ivy did it when she was 11. She actually is the youngest student at Bob Jones University to ever take and complete a college course. She started when she was 11 years old. She finished the course with a 4.0. She actually had a 4.0 up until a history class kind of knocked her down into the 3s. But Micah and Ivy have both graduated from high school. Ivy graduated when she was 13, and Micah graduated when he was 16. And they're both second semester freshmen doing online studying through Bob Jones University. We're strongly considering sending him to college this fall. He's 17 now. So all of that was just a big picture of what my family did. Again, I don't believe it's fair to say that my children are gifted in ways that the average child is not. What I did was I just came to it from the perspective saying, okay, you are capable of more than you realize. You're capable of more than our culture realizes. You're capable, honestly, of more than I realize. And when we look at the history of the world universally, and we look at you individually, the goal is to figure out, what are you actually capable? What is your best? 1 Corinthians 10:31, whether therefore you eat or drink or whatsoever you do, that includes schooling, do all to the glory of God. What is the highest level at which you can excel and glorify God in your education? And then let's do that. And so that was the process of determining and discovering who they were and how God had created them and what things that what levels were going to be appropriate for them. And it was exciting. I say was just because I'm no longer technically a homeschooling parent. But it was an amazing number of years seeing it work in progress with them and seeing them really reach their potential and not get burnt out and not struggle with a lot of the issues that children both in public and Christian education, as well as sometimes homeschooling children, struggle with.
So in other words, it was just basically having a different mindset when you approached education.
It starts with that for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Expectational education is not tied to a specific geographic location. So this is not, Asian education is better or American education is better, and it's not. But it's outside of all of that, and it's that philosophical framework that approaches it from the perspective that nobody truly knows what their best is. But what we want to do is use these tools to identify what that best is and equip the individual, regardless of the type of education that they're in, to rise to the level of that expectation.
And the tools meaning like the curriculum and
not so much. I would say that this really works with any curriculum. some people ask me, is this just a grade skipping? They refer to it as just a grade skipping way of doing things. And I tell them it's not designed to be that way. It's not just mere grade skipping. It's quantitatively different paradigm than that, because we're just seeking to help you do your best, all to the glory of God, which may or may not involve grade skipping. There may be children whose best is going to be quote unquote grades behind where they, their physical age may be. It's not about that, though oftentimes it does create that. So regardless of the curriculum, sometimes it will look like the fact that the world doesn't understand what the average seventh grader is really capable of. And so perhaps maybe ninth, 10th, 11th grade math is actually going to be better for this child. Whereas for this child, maybe it's going to be something different.
Okay. So you're kind of looking for their strengths and just finding
Looking,
them where their level is, right? Or,
yes.
okay.
And there are two big pieces of that. Go ahead.
Oh no, you finish, and then I have a question.
Oh, ask your question first, because it might be my answer might answer. Yeah.
No, what I was gonna say is, if I wanted to start doing this with my children today, but my child is 14
Mhm.
or 10 years old, what would be my first step? That was my question.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked that, because I can say what I was going to say within the context of that, and I think it'll be really helpful.
Okay.
The first thing that we need to do, and I talk any educator, I'll refer to them as educators, but the reality is, I think a lot of homeschoolers maybe don't always view themselves like that. You are an educator, but you don't need to. It doesn't need to be the world's definition of that. But we're educating, we're influencing, we're teaching our kids. I tell them that we need to first understand the power of expectations. This is huge. Please understand that when we lower our expectations for our children, we're actually demanding failure of them. If your best is up here, and I give you an expectation that is lower than your best, then you are going to, when you meet that expectation, you're going to fail to do your best. I'm demanding failure of you when I give you low expectations. If I give you moderate expectations, I'm actually just reinforcing complacency. Now, the public school system in America has done both of those really well. Okay, we have demanded failure of our students, and we have reinforced complacency because we don't expect greatness from anybody. And when I say greatness, really the funny thing is it's not really that great. It used to be the average. It used to be just the accepted. Of course, that's obviously what you should be doing. You don't get a gold star for it. Nowadays, we would consider it greatness.
Okay.
Now, then there's the opposite extreme. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, could you give me an example of a phrase or something that would be lowering the expectation of a child, like something that you would say to them that you don't realize could be making that, a demand for failure?
Sure. Well, I think even not even so much a phrase. I think the old adage that we don't know what we don't know is huge, right? So we go into homeschooling and we basically just rely on other individuals who know what they're doing to help us in this process. People go to your channel because you're going to help them know what they don't know. And some of the issues is that we just have this general cultural mindset. So we think within the context of grades. A child from this age should know these things. Why? Who chose those things? Why those things? Sometimes those things is actually the low expectation, honestly. But we do it not knowing it's a low expectation, just because we're told that children from this age group need to know these things, when in actuality, children from this age group could be capable of knowing these things. So sometimes it's just simply we don't know. As a biblical counselor, though, I will say that the way that low expectations oftentimes play themselves out in parenting is just that where the worst kind of it is all where we don't expect them to do it and we do it for them. So I'm going to tie your shoe for you because we're rushing to get out of the house. I'm going to make your breakfast for you because you're going to burn it. We have all of these excuses for why you're not capable of doing this thing. And so therefore I'm going to do it. That is the ultimate example of low expectations because they're required to do nothing and it all gets done for them. That's an example.
Yeah. And what's funny is that just brought it into me thinking about Naomi with when I take her to therapies, they're always getting on my case. Stop doing stuff for her. Have her, because she can do it. And
Yeah.
And then she just gets lazy and she'll be like, Mom, I want you to, like she'll kind of hint around. But I think too, that definitely applies to parents of kids with special needs, because in our heads, we think they're not capable, but they actually are.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. Where were you left off?
Well, there's the other extreme. Yeah, there's the other extreme where there's inappropriate high expectations. So if, a silly example is if I tell my daughter, I need you to go out in the backyard and build a rocket that will land me on the moon. It doesn't matter. She doesn't have the finances. She doesn't, even if she knew everything she needed to know about, rocket science, she couldn't accomplish that. And when I have an inappropriate high expectations, I actually force failure. Low expectations demand failure. Inappropriate high expectations force failure. Now, with those three things right there, this is what oftentimes is the subconscious under the radar reasons that we have a hard time really understanding expectational education and what appropriate high expectations are, because it feels like a minefield. If I give them too low, I'm demanding failure. If I'm somewhere in the middle, I'm just reinforcing complacency. And if I give them too high of expectations, I'm forcing them to fail. It's like, and then so we just kind of default to our basic, what I call fleshly parenting styles. Speaking of, real quick caveat here, I'd love to give you something to your listeners and your viewers. So Evermind Ministry has an app called the Evermind app. And we have a number of online courses. Evermind Ministry has a number of different ministries that are part of it. So Truth.Love.Family is the one that's all about parenting and family. And I have a podcast with over 500 some episodes. We're creeping up onto 550 episodes, all about parenting, biblical parenting. And I travel and speak. And one of the conferences that I do is called the Biblical Parenting Essentials Conference. In that conference, I talk about those 4 fleshly parenting styles that's really easy for us to slip into without realizing it. And then the 5th parenting style to which God calls us. But in that, so anyway, for your viewers, I'm going to send you a link that you can share with them. That course normally is $25. It comes with all of the seminar stuff, but it also comes with a bunch of other podcast resources bundled together for people who want to increase their research and keep doing more study on it. And I'd love to give that to your viewers just for $10. They can access all of that, as well as get access to our free parenting course, 25 Days to Becoming a Premeditated Parent, access to the podcast, and a bunch of other stuff on the app. So definitely, if that can be a blessing to them, I want them to check that out.
I'm gonna
because
do it.
those, oh, awesome, yes. Because those basic fleshly parenting things that we slide into without thinking, when we see those 3 options that we have, and we're like, oh no, that's really the issue in our parenting and in our teaching. Those natural, sin nature influence decisions that we make versus rising to what God has called and created us to do. And so that's where that 4th option in this situation comes in, where we're shooting for appropriately high expectations, because those promote maturity. Okay. So the first step is really just having the right view of expectations, the 3 holes that we can fall into if we're not careful. But then what we're shooting for appropriately high expectations that are then going to promote maturity. So then we have to go and take the next step. But what does maturity mean? And again, it's really easy culturally. I have a very bad understanding of that. There is what I refer to as physical maturity, cognitive maturity, and then spiritual maturity. When I'm speaking with unbelievers, I refer to this as mental maturity, which I don't like to use, but technically, biblically speaking, we know that our spirit and our minds are the same concept: spirit, mind, heart, all the same concept, the core of our being. So I like to use the idea of the spiritual maturity. Those 3 things do not run in conjunction to each other. Okay. Just because you're growing in physical maturity does not mean you're actually growing in the other 2. Now, physical maturity is not going to be a thing that we're going to consider. The world says this child's this age, this is what they learn. That's their criteria. It's no good. Their age doesn't matter. And to a certain degree, I would even say that their special need doesn't matter either. That's a side thing. That's a pressure. It's a factor in their life, but we don't really need to consider that because the other 2 are going to tell us what they're really capable of. The cognitive ability is just really the measure of the brain's strength. And we have lots of things, lots of ways to assess that, the testing of retention and recall and systematization and problem solving. That's all, dealing with brain elasticity and their ability to memorize things. So we want to know where they fall in that. I'm not saying that's not important. It's very important. We want to know that, but we can't assume that just because they have great retention or problem solving abilities, that they're spiritually mature, because that is an entirely different set of concepts. The spiritual maturity is really a test of the person's individual wisdom. Biblically speaking, you gain knowledge, you understand that knowledge, and then you use that knowledge. That is wisdom, using the knowledge you're given. So as I look at a child and I try to understand what are they cognitively capable of, that's kind of with my son. I hit that fourth grade book and I saw that cognitively he was struggling. But then there's also the concept of the individual's spiritual maturity. My son's early on, his difficulty always was in problem solving. He would make a bigger deal out of the problem than he would the solution. I can't tell you how many times I would say, Micah, take all of that energy and focus it on figuring out the problem instead of talking about the problem. Because he'd be like, and this is not really an exaggeration, oh, 2 plus 2, man, 2 plus 2, that is hard. That's going to be math, and that's addition. Okay, 2 plus, and it's just like, none of that was actually solving anything. That was just talking about the problem, looking at the problem. That's what Peter did when he was on the Sea of Galilee. That big wave was coming at him. He was staring at the problem and he sank. So we want to help our kids. For him, that was an example of the spiritual maturity. It wasn't a cognitive problem. He could have figured out 2 plus 2 really easily. He had everything he needed to do that. He probably had it memorized. But spiritually, he would allow himself to become a little bit anxious as he was staring at an unknown. He had a little bit, like most children do, he was a little bit of a control freak, right? And if he didn't have the answer he wanted when he wanted it, it was like, oh, and everything became so hard. So those are the two big concepts that we have to understand when we're talking about the maturities. I'm trying to find out what an appropriately high expectation for them is. I have to get a handle on that. Cognitive side is going to come from academics and testing and things like that. The spiritual side is going to come from the scriptures. That's the best place. When I'm working with public school teachers and things like that, I can't offer them any help, really. I mean, there are secular ways of maturity by God's common grace that you can standardize, but really the scriptures are going to give us the picture of whether or not our children are taking the knowledge of God and the understanding of God and actually using it in their lives.
Wow.
A lot of information. I know, tons of information. I'm so passionate about this.
No, I'm taking a ton of notes here. I guess, I mean, unless there's anything, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to it, because I don't have any more questions. The thing that I'm looking at is, well, I'm going to make my husband take the parenting thing with me.
Oh, that would be cool. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
It is, because, I mean, yes, that's all I have to say. Like, I love it. I don't know, where can people find you?
Okay, so specifically in regard to this information, this is actually kind of, I don't know, in a way special. I have not published on any of this yet. It really, my desire was to wait for my children, to basically my guinea pigs, students to graduate and to be able to provide a little bit, more research on that from a personal side of things. So really conversations I have like this, and I've only had this particular conversation now a couple times. Your folks are finding this information here, and they're probably some of the only people who know if they've heard this. In regard to the other things I do, I would encourage people to go to evermindministries.com. That's all one word, Evermind, not Nevermind. Evermindministries.com. And there they can see the different ministries. So there's Truth.Love.Family. There's the year-long celebration of God. There's Faith Tree, Biblical Counseling and Discipleship. Excuse me. And then there's my writing and speaking ministry, AMBrewster Ministries. All the same ministry, but all different focuses, because Evermind Ministries is all about keeping God's truth at the center of the human experience. And each of us have made up a bunch of different facets. And so we wanted to be able to specify, what's keeping God's truth at the center of the family experience and the personal discipleship and the counseling and so on and so forth. So that's why we have those different categories. I'm on social media all over the place. Each of the ministries has a social media page, and so does AMBrewster. You can find that most places. And I guess the one thing I would throw out is that if someone wanted to take this today, they're like, okay, wow, I'm going to go back and watch this 3 or 4 more times because I swear that man's talking so fast. There's so much information. How do I actually take this and how do I use this today? If I could boil it down, all right, this is a way to kind of streamline looking at your child and seeing where they are on the maturity scale, specifically the spiritual maturity scale. When it comes to influence, the influence they receive and the influence they give, try to identify, make it simple, as you, the parent, are influencing them. Do they accept that? And are they changed by it? That's good. If they're rejecting that, that's not good. Look at the influence, maybe in their siblings' lives or their friends' lives. Are they influencing them for good, or are they influencing them in negative ways? Okay. I put it into 4 different categories. There is the influential maturity. These are consistently, they're benefiting from the positive influences of their authorities, but they're also consistently benefiting their peers and their authorities and their own influence as they interact. That is the sign of a mature child, a spiritually mature child. They, obviously there's lots of biblical concepts that need to be part of that identifying, right? Somebody could say this child's very, positively influential, but they're not born again. Well, that's a problem. But so, obviously all of that assumed. But then you've got kids, and I call them a polite maturity. They consistently benefit their peers and authorities. They're nice in that way, but they really don't benefit consistently from the influence that the authorities are giving to them. Like, oh yeah, but then they don't do it. Okay, that's an issue. Got to watch out for those polite, mature kids. The other 2 ones are a little bit easier to see. There's the antagonistic mature. Those are the ones who they consistently harm their peers and their authority, but they do consistently benefit from the influence of the teacher or the authority in their lives. That's an interesting category. A lot of teachers and parents have no idea what to do with the antagonistic mature kids. The destructive mature ones, though, are the ones who aren't benefiting from the influence and whose influence is only ever negative. So you say to your kid, all right, say to yourself, where does my child fall? Where they fall is going to identify where you need to start when it comes to helping to understand where they need to grow in their maturity and where you need to bump the expectations. Because I tell people all the time, the lower down the kids get on that maturity list, the less important the academics are. Not that we stop teaching academics. It's just I can't take a polite, antagonistic, or a destructively mature child, and I can't really expect that they're ever going to come up to their highest level of expectation in their lives, because spiritually, their spiritual maturity is wanting to fight that. They don't want to do that. They're not interested in being the person God called and created them to be. And so academically, unless they're just motivated themselves for that, they're probably not going to want to rise up to that. I need to identify the spiritual maturity first. And I just want to say this as a biblical counselor, as a parent, as a homeschooling parent, that always has to be the biggest part of all of our parenting. Academics are important. Learning to cook is important, and tying our shoes is important. But the child's relationship with God and their growth in Christ is always going to be the most important thing, because everything else spirals out from that, including their education. And what happens, a lot of the families that end up coming to my ministry for help, they come for lots of reasons, but there's a unique category of that come where they had a lot of high expectations for their kids in every other category except for their spiritual maturity. And that never works. It always explodes and implodes somewhere along the line. So if we're looking at our kids and saying, yeah, they're polite, they're antagonistic, they're destructive, the real focus has to be on spiritual maturity. When we get to a place by God's grace that they're coming into the influential category, the influential maturity, where they're learning, they're teachable. Now we can start turning our sights to the cognitive side of things to start to assess what are they really capable of, and finding those, what I call those moments, those appropriately high expectations, that they stop and they get excited because, wow, they're doing this thing and they're accomplishing it. When they're teachable, that's when we can move them into that other category and start really seeing cool things happening in their education and other facets of their lives.
Okay. What I've already categorized my kids, by the way. I'm running out of paper here because I'm just writing stuff down. So how do I get my kids to that top? Like, what are some tools? I mean, obviously scripture.
Yep.
I'm guessing modeling, because I'm also thinking here, I know some adults that even don't have full spiritual maturity.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah, and this is all about teachable. Your child, an influentially mature child, is not going to inherently be like ticking off all the boxes. They're more spiritual than Paul. No, no, no. They're teachable, and they have a beneficial influence in people's lives. They have tons of room to grow, right? To your question, one really important place to start is, why do your kids do what they do? You'll never help your child change if you don't know why they do what they do. And I have a podcast series called The Merest Christianity. That Truth.Love.Parent. That's the podcast, Truth.Love.Parent. And if you go to Truth.Love.Parent.com, you can search the podcast series. You can find that that goes through the Bible and helps us to understand why we do what we do. Because when we are able to figure that out, I have an antagonistic mature child, or I have a polite or a destructive mature child, I can't help them change if I don't know why. Identify that first and start working. I also have another podcast series called it's called the four children. I think it's called the four children. I've called it different things. I referred to it in so many different ways. The four children deal with the parable of the soil. When Jesus teaches us about what happens when you throw the seeds out into the soil, and we step through those parables throughout the Gospels, and we build it out from Scripture to understand that people generally respond to truth in one of four different ways. Your children are going to fall into one or more of those categories. It's kind of their knee jerk. Understanding what category they fall into, being able to identify what category they fall into, is also going to be a huge part in helping us parent them. So in that series, I explain the different responses to truth. I give you tools to identify if your child is falling into one of those categories. And then I also give you help of how to parent a child who's fallen into one of the categories they shouldn't be in.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna find all of these, and I'm gonna put all the links in the description box below so people can find you. And I like right now want to jump out of my chair and be like to my husband, I'm like, Eric, this is what we're doing for the next month. So
That's very kind of you.
yeah, no, seriously, because I mean, for me, I always need help with parenting. And I
We all
think,
do.
yeah, we all do. I mean, I'll say it. I'm not an expert at all by any means of anything, but I always need help. And I always need
Yeah,
support. And I
so
feel
do I.
like here's a little secret. And I don't mind sharing this with my audience either. My son, who's 14, oops, my son who is 14 wants to be a biblical counselor.
Awesome.
That's what he wants to do. So I'm probably, after we get off, I'm going to probably talk to him for a little bit and chit chat and see what he thinks.
I'll
I'll
tell you
probably have him
this.
watch this.
ACBC, the Association of Certified Biblical Counselors. I'm certified through them. I have my master's degree in biblical counseling from Bob Jones, but I'm certified through them. I have the opportunity to speak at their conferences and stuff. They actually have high school curriculum in biblical counseling,
Oh, really? Through
specifically
Bob
geared
Jones?
toward homeschoolers. No, through the ACBC,
Oh,
Association of
ACBC.
Certified Biblical Counselors. Yep. They have biblical counseling curriculum specifically for homeschoolers and Christian schools for high school.
Okay.
Check
I'm
that
gonna look
out.
at that.
Yeah, check it
I'm
out.
really excited. Thank you so much for coming on here. And I feel like this is now also one of my favorite interviews ever. So I
Oh,
learned so much.
wow.
Yeah.
Hugely flattering. Thank you for that.
No, I learned so much. I just hope that, those of you guys that are watching, if you can share it with your friends, share it on Facebook, share it wherever you can share it with others. So we can just get these ideas out there and really focus on raising our kids biblically and doing everything we can for this generation. So
Amen.
thank you, Aaron, so much. And all the links are in the description box, and I will see the rest of you guys later. Bye.